Hi, everyone. I am Dr. Kristen of the Good Doctors of Abbey Research, and I would like to very much welcome you to our channel. Here at Abbey Research, we are empathy educators who are obsessed with culture, both lived and popped. And we try to use every opportunity we can to explore how humans can live together better, and not in the kumbaya or Hallmark sense, but in the actual doing work of how we live better together. And this series, which is called Welcome to My World, is a huge part of that. I talked to somebody for 20, 30 minutes who is different than me, which is everybody, about something that makes them different than me and maybe even different than you. And we can all learn a little bit about someone else's life. So today, joining me all the way from Hawaii, which is a place that I am desperate to get to, especially as these COVID times just ground me into Philly, I'm joined by Scott Roberts. Scott is the co-founder and host of the Heavily Meditated podcast, a meditation and mindset coach, and a speaker and world traveler. I had the privilege of being on Scott's podcast, and you will be delighted. And if you've not encountered this podcast, you need to. It is a damn delight. Scott and his wife/business partner, Emily's journey into better understanding the human mind and consciousness began in 2006 when Scott had a complete mental breakdown and was diagnosed with Bipolar II Disorder. In an effort to learn what caused the breakdown and ultimately save Scott's life, the couple was guided to Eckhart Tolle's book, A New Earth. Through studying the mind from the inside out and incorporating mindful practices like yoga, asana, and meditation, Scott went from experiencing crippling anxiety, depression, and suicidal thoughts to having more control over his mind, body, and state of being than ever before. When the two saw radical transformation in their lives in a relatively short period of time, they knew they had uncovered something truly amazing. Sure sounds like it. That's when they decided to dedicate their lives to this work and share it with others. Now they travel the world coaching clients from their laptops and sharing their mission with everyone along the way. Scott, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me on the show, Kristen. This is actually really exciting. I've obviously interviewed quite a few people, yourself included, for the podcast, but it's one of the first opportunities I've had to actually be interviewed and share a little bit about my story. It's kind of fun hearing my bio.
Yeah, it's always a little bit of a weird experience. You're like, oh, did I conjugate that verb the way that I wanted to? Yeah. I am honored to be the first person that gets the fresh wisdom here. So that bio is incredibly vulnerable. And so I also want to give you a chance to expand on any piece of it before we dive into some more of my questions, to give even more context to any of that if you would like to.
Yeah, sure. So I'll get real and raw with all of your listeners. Honestly, I had a lifelong journey with depression, anxiety, severe mood swings when I was younger. I had everything from like I had the tick of pulling out my hair, so I was literally without eyelashes and eyebrows for a period of time. Really good photos in the school yearbook for me.
Oh, I can imagine that was a statement you were making.
Yeah, it was pretty self-esteem being a young kid I was extremely thin because I couldn't keep food down. I threw up and went to the bathroom most of the time, mainly because I was really, really nervous all the time. And, it wasn't for years that I found out that, it wasn't really so much like some sort of condition or something like that, but more of a byproduct of living in an extremely volatile household and also taking in tons of caffeine and sugar as a kid. I was literally living off Cocoa Puffs and caffeinated coffee for breakfast and drinking sugary sodas all day and eating peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, that sort of thing. So, no wonder my digestion was messed up and I was always nervous. But as life went on, being super intuitive and such an empath and feeling everything so intensely and not being in an environment that really allowed that, very much growing up in a very tough masculine Southern, upbringing where everybody's like, suck it up, be a man, don't be a sissy, other words that I won't use. But, just that type of upbringing with somebody who's such an empath and feels everything so intensely and has very different ideas than everyone around them. It just led to me feeling very much like an outcast, very much like nobody understood me, my friends, my family, just feeling, very apart from everyone. And just growing up, lots of intense experiences with emotions swinging one way or the other. And that led me to start thinking about and planning for suicide as early as 11 years old, and started attempting that on fairly regular basis for many years. And the latter was in 2006, when even though, my wife Emily and I had an amazing life, we had, done well in our careers. We were reaching heights of our corporate careers. My wife was in marketing and graphic design and ad and that sort of thing, and was doing quite well. Had a really good career going, and I had gotten into sales and was getting more and more progressively intense with the jobs that I was taking. So that, combined with a lifetime of struggles with mental health, led me to the point where I just reached a complete breakdown. Just had no desire to live anymore, really wanted to take my own life, and ended up in a hospital for a period of time, then into intense therapy. I was going therapy almost daily. But the bad part about it was that, due to the fact that I really didn't understand what was going on, I didn't have any sort of context of why all these things were happening in my mind. And when I went to traditional therapy, it was basically, we have a chemical imbalance. This is your condition. These are the medications you need to take, and you'll go to therapy and talk about why you feel so bad. And that was the path I was on for about a year and a half after my breakdown. But I just knew there was something else, like nothing was working. They started terming me as being medication resistant. In other words, everything they tried just made it worse. I would take a antipsychotic medication and I'd have like a psychotic break and be like completely manic. They'd give me antidepressant, I'd get super depressed or super mood swingy. So just everything they tried just wasn't working, was getting worse. And it was ultimately after about a year and a half after I had had my breakdown, was going to therapy, was taking the medication. It was actually getting to the point to where I felt much worse than I ever had before. And it was actually to the point where I was like, maybe actually the killing yourself thing would have been better than what I'm going through right now. That's where I was. And so we were just at this point of just utter just confusion, misery, just, something has to change. This can't be the way life really is. Why did this all of a sudden happen? So that's when Emily and I found out about A New Earth with Eckhart Tolle, and that little guy just rocked my world. I was not at all ready to hear what he's saying when she first kind of started, hey, this sounds like what you've been going through. Does this sound familiar? And he uses the word ego a lot. And my understanding at that time of ego was more like, well, I think I'm the coolest person in the world, so I have an ego, right? So, when you hear the word ego, I'm like, well, I don't think I'm the coolest person in the world. Why are you telling me it's my ego that's making me this way? So, hearing what he was saying was not easy in the beginning, but, Emily was patient with me, and fortunately I was patient with myself and just started educating myself. And when I started learning that 99% of all the suffering of mankind resides, like in the head and, between the temples. That's when I decided, well, let's look into this. Let's figure out how I can use my mind to make myself better if my mind is making me worse. And so, yeah, started getting really deep into meditation and yoga asana. That's the postures, all the warrior twos and all that sort of stuff that everybody knows in Western yoga, but started getting really heavy into both of them combined together, and started really studying human psychology and how the mind works and all that. And yeah, it started a whole new life for me. Within 3 months, I was almost completely off all the medications, and now have been for many years completely off everything. Stopped going to therapy and started instead doing lots of meditation. And now with a wife who's actually a rapid transformational therapy practitioner, I get RTT sessions as needed. So yeah, just did much more of a holistic approach. And now that's just, a lifelong journey. And since that happened, and I was like, wow, if I'm able to get myself completely off medications and avoid, like literally they were saying that ECT, the electroconvulsive therapy, was probably the best option for me at that point. So that's where they put the electrodes on and shock you with electricity, hoping it'll somehow shock the crazy out of you. And then of course they were talking about, possible institutionalization. So, just being monitored closely for the rest of my life in a not in a padded cell. I'm not going to dramatize it, but definitely, you know, monitored and that sort of thing. Instead, going from that to, I mean, living what I think is an absolute luxury life. Just, I mean, you know, we get to travel the world, we get to choose where we live, we get to work with amazing people, teaching them how to do the same thing that we did. So, yeah, it's just been a wild journey, and that's what brings me to you today.
That is, first of all, thank you for all of that and for trusting my channel and the World Wide Web with all that pain. But I know a big part of that is that you can look back really objectively and kind of see what was going on. And we talked a little bit before when I was on your channel, and then it struck me again this time that so much of your personal particularities came from a complete disconnect between your body and your brain. And that as a child, you were not in a situation in which your body and your brain were connected or nurtured together in a connected way. And so then they just kind of kept, it sounds like, being at war with one another until you could find a place where they could be in synchronicity. And there are definitely people for whom that synchronicity still involves medication and still involves other therapies and things like that. But for you, that synchronicity was so essential that solving it any other way was just silly. It wasn't ever going to work.
Right.
Yeah. So bodies fascinate me, and how we work with our bodies. And especially so often in Western culture, we're kind of taught that our bodies are our enemies in some way. We have to, subjugate them in some way. We have to starve them, or we have to, we have to push them to their limits, or like whatever, that our bodies are kind of, we're not ever really taught to live in harmony with our bodies. And I know that the discipline of yoga, the actual spiritual discipline of yoga, is entirely about living at center with your body and being in with your body and all that kind of stuff. But in the West, it's a very feminine movement. I think you are actually probably only the second male that I've spoken to who is very open and excited about yoga practice. So my perception is that it's still very, very male dominated. Female dominated. Am I correct in that, or are there pockets I don't know about?
Yeah, definitely. I feel like in the past several years, there's been much more of an interest in it from men. They're starting to realize that it's something that's accessible. But it definitely, when I went for my first teacher training, I was one of 3 men in a large group of people who were going through the teacher training. So there were roughly 40 of us, and only 3 of us were men. 2 of them left by the end of the program. So I was one, which there was also one other guy that was in there that was part of the teacher training, but he wasn't a student as I was. I was really one of the only people that finished it, and I was one of the only male teachers in the area. There was probably only maybe 4 or 5 male teachers in the area, and very few male students in classes. Yeah.
And the kind of male space in yoga, is it, I guess, a thing? Like, yoga feels gendered to me, but that could be entirely because I am very constantly aware of my gender construction. So is there stigma within the Western yoga community? Is that something, especially around bodies and what yoga bodies are supposed to look like? Is that something that you faced?
Well, I think, that definitely within the community, there's more accepting. So as yoga teachers, they're much more accepting of you coming in, and they're very encouraging. Like as a teacher, I was always trying to get more men into class, and also people who aren't your quote unquote typical yogi or yogini. I'm always trying to tell everybody, hey, get into class, try it out. There's something for everybody. But that being said, within the actual community of people who practice, there is a bit of like competition and that sort of thing within, like who can look the best, who can perform the most exotic and beautiful postures and that sort of thing. And a lot of that has to do with flexibility, which men typically just are not as flexible as women, not because it isn't physically possible, but it's just not something that we've cultivated our entire lives. Like we're not, as boys, we're not as into gymnastics and as into being ballerinas as girls are. It's just, culturally, that's the way it is. That's changing, of course, too. But yeah, so as a man going to yoga the first time, it was really intimidating to walk in. I was at that time still a fairly competitive athlete. My wife and I were both avid mountain bikers. That's how we met at a race in North Carolina in 1995. But yeah, so I had been cycling and doing all sorts of weightlifting when I was younger and stuff. So I was fit. In my head, I thought I would walk into whatever level class I want to go to, which of course I would never go to the beginner. I went into the higher level class the first time because I'm strong, I'm an athlete. And it was like maybe 10 minutes in, I'm pouring sweat, I'm shaking, I can't hold any of the postures. I'm looking around and there's all these real thin little ballerina looking women just throwing their legs up over their heads, stretching every which way, and they're holding postures that I can't stay in. And they look like they're going to pop out their phone and start talking to somebody any minute. So it was very intimidating. And I'm like back in the back of the class in child's pose, just how am I going to make it out of here? How can I keep from throwing up in front of all these people and just make it through the class? That was my experience. It wasn't like, oh, this is the most transformative, amazing experience I've ever had. It was horrible. And I told myself I would probably never go back. But then I learned that there were different types of yoga, different styles, and different classes that you could go to that you didn't have to torture yourself every time. So I just gave it another shot, and then I was hooked once I found my niche within that type of yoga.
That makes sense. Yoga was very intimidating to me for sure, because I saw all the Lululemon ads constantly and was like, well, this is what you have to look like to do yoga. Like this is what yoga looks like. And it doesn't look like somebody who is shaped like me or who isn't, a woman in their mid 20s with long blonde hair. This is kind of what it is. And the longer I love, actually my two best friends are both yogis, and one is a certified teacher and the other one is just a deep practitioner. And Dr. Erin, people on this channel know, has talked frequently about how if she doesn't do her very specific yoga practice, she feels out of balance. Like that's how she maintains her balance. So it's a fascinating discipline to me, because within the community, you're right, like within it, it's like, oh no, the whole thing is to just be who you are and show up on the mat and be there that day and practice. And externally, it's so different. And I don't quite know where that comes from. I've never experienced that much disparity within a group, within or without a group before, in terms of judgment. And so that's just really interesting to me. I'd love to switch gears really briefly and talk about meditation in particular. I think that's a buzzword a lot. We talked about this a little bit on your pod, and I've heard you address this a little bit on your pod, that everyone talks about meditation sometimes as a throwaway and not like a discipline. But there are fundamentals to meditative practice if you're going to do something kind of traditional. So if I was coming to you and I said, Scott, I have no idea where to start. I have a deep fear of silence, but I know I have to slow down. And my therapist or my doctor or my spouse told me I need to try meditation. What do I do first? What would be your answer?
So first, yoga, which meditation is part of. So yoga has 8 limbs, and the yoga asana, or the postures, is one limb of that. Meditation is the other limb of that. And then there's others as well that have to do with non-harming, non-violence, and that sort of thing. But basically, yoga means union, or to yoke, to union with yourself, all parts of yourself, all parts of others, and that sort of thing. So that I wanted to.
No, I love that. I've never heard that that's what yoga means before. I've been in this community. Okay, cool. That's so rad. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, because I think everybody hears the word yoga, they automatically think, okay, stretchy pants, ponytails, and crazy wild postures. Okay.
Yes. And who can do a headstand the longest? Yeah. And then maybe also goats. Yeah.
Yeah. And so typical to human nature, the yoga asana, or postures, those are the least mentioned aspect of the 8 limbs of yoga. Really? It is least focused on with any teaching to begin with from yoga. And yet that's the one that we latch onto, and that's the one that we focus all our effort on. Now, the good thing about that is that because we are a society of people who want to go to the gym and that sort of thing, if we want to fit in and be part of that crowd, it draws that within Western yoga because it is very much a performance art in a way for some people. And it is very much a way to get a nice yoga butt, totally understandable. But as a teacher, you see people come in for that all the time, and it's your job and your mission and your luxury to be able to teach them something beyond just that. And so that's where the meditation piece comes in. And that's I actually turned to meditation when I was 11, when I mentioned earlier that that's when I first started really idealizing and thinking about suicide. Well, I started going to meditation because at that time I was about maybe 20 to 30% underweight for my size and age. I was borderline anorexic, was very unhealthy. And I also had a severe stutter. I could barely speak in public at all. The idea of doing something like this, I probably would have been throwing up for like 3 days to even post it. It would have been horrible. I literally had an experience to where I was supposed to do something like this. I was going to be on TV because I ended up getting chosen out of my whole school. Like, who could they choose? But the one kid who's like
the one kid for whom this is a living nightmare.
So I ended up getting to go on public TV as a kid to represent my school and talk about social issues. I had no idea what I was doing, and I literally pooed myself. So anyway, was not. So anyway, I came to meditation because I was trying to actually learn how not to stutter and to how to calm down. And I learned basic breath work and some relaxation techniques so that I could get to sleep, so that I could calm down. And it transformed my life. Obviously, I'm not stuttering terribly now. I still have a little bit here and there, but it's nowhere, like it used to be. And, I'm fairly normal weight now. I can eat, keep things down. But of course, like most of us do, I had this major transformative experience because of it. It really helped. And I could honestly see it, of course, right away. But it fell away and it just didn't become a big thing. And it wasn't until when I had my episode in 2006 that it came back in a big way for me. And I learned that for me, meditation was something that was not just like, I guess, like a luxury or something, but more of a necessity. And I had to look at it the same way as taking my medication. It's like you don't miss doses of medication just because you don't feel like taking it that day.
Right.
Same thing with meditation for me. I have to do it every day. I mean, it's part of my life. It's, what keeps me happy, what keeps me feeling well. But so that being said, finally getting to your question, I think meditation is not about you learning how to turn your mind off and stop thinking. It's quite the opposite. And I think that's the misnomer that most people think is they think of, okay, well, meditation has to be that I go on a Vipassana retreat, which is a silent retreat, and I sit down and I don't move. And that's what meditation is. And it certainly is a part of it. And it's certainly a style of it. But just like with anything else, there's tons of different ways to do something. And ultimately, it comes down to you. So for me, for example, I change my meditation depending on what I need for that moment, for that day, for whatever I have going on. So if I need to get energized, if I'm feeling a little slow and a little tired in the morning, I can do a meditation that will boost my energy through the roof and give me focus, give me tons of physical and chi energy that I can move. Or if I'm really anxious and really worried about something, I can do a meditation that calms me and relaxes me. So there's meditation for whatever you need, and you just have to learn either through somebody coaching you on how to do it or on your own what you need and what works for you. I think that's the most important thing.
For sure. And a huge part of it, I want to just draw back to people, is breath and being aware of our breath. That's when I can't do anything else in yoga because of my pain cycle or because of anything else, I am intentional about breathing. And that I have found to be the thing I can manage when I can't manage anything else, but that still manages to be one of the most important pieces for me, and being attentive to my breath. So I hope if you're like me and meditation is exactly what Scott just described, where you have to sit in a monastery in total silence and maybe just eat gruel, and it sounds really overwhelming. I hope you can hear both of us say that really there's baby places to start, and there's pieces of it you can choose, and there's ways to craft your own thing. Scott's podcast is an incredible resource because he has all sorts of people who do all sorts of meditation, including weirdos like me who do something that doesn't look like meditation at all to most people, but works for me. And you can hear those stories and hear the experiences as people guide through. We'll make sure the link to his pod is in the show notes. So Scott, is there any kind of, I'm wrapping up and I want to be mindful and honor your time that you've so graciously given us. Is there anything else that you'd like to say in parting?
It'd probably go on for like 5 or 6 hours because I love to talk and tell stories. But the one thing that I will say is that if you've ever considered doing any sort of meditation, just research a little bit, find out what might work for you. And if you have questions, we're always here to, answer any questions you have. These are great resources. What you're doing here on the show is fantastic. And I love that we were able to talk to you on the podcast and help share with our audience a little bit different perspectives as well from you. So if you're thinking about meditation, give it a try. It can actually be quite fun and quite interesting. Doesn't have to be torture.
No, it probably very rarely should be, to be completely honest, because we torture ourselves enough. So
right.
The link to my chat with Scott about my particular practice will also be in the show notes. And the other links to get a hold of Scott and Emily, and if working with them is something that sounds in your body and spirit like your next step into whatever the journey you're on is. So Scott, thank you again for joining me. This has been an honor.
Thank you so much.
And I will see you guys next time on Welcome to My World.